Hello.
Hi again.
So, what is the process this month, Rory?
It is the vendor audit defence process. Is that the right way of saying that, or is there a slightly different tweak or name to it? Are you all right with that?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So, this process is probably one of the most fraught processes you're ever going to run as a software asset manager. Vendor audits are really stressful, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you ever done one?
I'm trying to think back. Not directly, no.
Yeah, just
No.
tangentially being involved in the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done a few. And they've been fun, shall we say. Fun. But you learn a lot through them.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure all the tips and tricks that they just spring on you.
Yeah, but also just managing expectations, making sure that you're working effectively with stakeholders, because they're so challenging. It really develops you as a professional and your own management skills to manage really hard, difficult situations. So, and you get some amazing war stories, of course, as well.
Yeah,
that you can dine off for the next 15 years, like me. Anyway, so I mean, there's so many issues that you could run an entire audit defence course, which of course we do. But I think from a process perspective, the process itself is no different from calculating licence compliance. The reason it's so fraught is because the stakes are so high.
Yes, yeah, there is a sort of wrapper around it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I sort of sometimes think of this not as a process, but almost as a procedure. It goes into the next level of detail from a process. It's almost the audit defence process is almost like the work instructions for a particular use case of the licence compliance process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to really understand what's going on, because of course the licence compliance process can be run internally by you as a team to calculate whether or not you're compliant or not. It could be run externally by an external auditor at your request, so that you're getting that external validation of where you are in terms of compliance. And then of course there's a third type, which is the software vendor themselves is exercising their audit rights within the end user license agreement to actually come and assess whether or not you're compliant and using their licenses, using their software according to the terms and conditions. So that is that last use case that is what we're concerned with this process. But more than that, the vendors can come and they can actually make a couple of different types of requests. So one is, we think you're non-compliant, we're going to audit you under the terms and conditions of the end user license agreement, and this is a formal audit. But then there's other types where they just come and they say, we think you might be non-compliant, we want to have a conversation with you, and then that escalates into what is effectively this process, again, another version of this process. The vendor might not be putting the legal weight behind it, and they're not doing it necessarily in order to get compensation for a breach of contract. They're doing it for a multitude of other reasons. They might want to try and sell you something. They're using this as a bit of a stick. They might want to find out a bit more about your future plans and what your estate looks like at the moment, so that in 6 months or a year's time they can sell you some new technology. There's all sorts of reasons why vendors come and ask you to perform an audit, and they may audit you direct themselves, or they may engage a third-party auditor to perform the audit on their behalf as well. So this is one reason why the whole situation is fraught, because actually understanding what the vendor intention can be really quite difficult as well.
Yeah, and if you do get a good handle on that, then it shapes your efforts accordingly moving forward.
Absolutely.
So it's having that backstory or understanding why they're knocking on the door in the first place is really quite important.
Yeah. So when the knock on the door comes, I think there's a couple of things again to think about. One is, who do you want to be audited? Let's get. In this situation, when you're an IT asset manager managing an audit, it feels like you have no power and the vendor has all the power, but that's actually not true. You have a huge amount of power because you're the one that knows what's going on within the organisation. And in fact, one of the reasons for auditing is because that's precisely what the vendor wants to know. They don't know and they want to know what's going on. So you actually have a huge amount of power. So when somebody comes knocking, think about how you want this audit to be run and then push that back onto the vendor. So I've had examples where I've had a Malaysian subsidiary ring up and say, we're being audited by X, and I've said, okay, that's fine. Are they just audited? I've not heard from the broader company, from the US based company or from our account manager about this. It's just simply a Malaysian thing. And I said to Malaysia, well, how do you feel about that? Do you want to go and do the audit? And they said, yeah, we'll just do the audit and not involve the rest of the organisation. So I was like, great. Then another scenario was, I don't know, it was always Malaysia. We had our Malaysian group contact us and say, this particular vendor wants to do an audit. And I was like, yeah, but they're using licenses that were purchased by the UK, so there's absolutely no point in Malaysia being audited on their own. I'm going to push back. So I rang our account manager and I said, look, you don't want to audit the whole group. You can't audit Malaysia on its own, so can you go and sort this out, please? And the account manager contacted the people in Malaysia who were pushing the audit, and the audit was cancelled. So there's those sorts of things that as a software asset manager you need to bear in mind and make the right decision for that situation.
So one of the things that I had a fantastic mentor at FAST, a guy called Pete Thomas, and he said one of the sort of anecdotes he recounted is that what lawyers like to do whenever they ever get a document is to take a highlighter and go through the document and look for the subjective words in it and highlight them from the point of things like reasonable, for an example, mostly, or words that could be
weasel words
construed in context. So if it's reasonable to conduct an audit during normal business operations, then the audit can proceed. And the audit terms and conditions are worth going through with a fine-tooth comb around this very exercise. Because if you are, for example, accommodating or going through a pandemic, you are going through a merger and acquisition, digital transformation, there is major upheaval that you are going through.
It's a peak business period.
It's not reasonable for you to be putting up with a vendor audit, so push back.
Yeah.
And use the audit terms and conditions and clauses that are in their agreements to say so.
Yeah.
Now it will give you breathing space. It doesn't mean to say that they won't come back in another 6 months, but it will give you that leeway to say, do you know what, they're on our radar there at this point, so we need to get our ducks in order.
Yeah.
So that's just another sort of top tip and trick there for you.
Yeah, for sure. So, and actually the notice period is a good one. Most audit clauses have a notice period, so you can push back for whatever that notice period is and take stock and think about what your options are during that period, and then you can and use that period wisely to work out how you're going to tackle the audit. So I always recommend that organisations put together an audit playbook, not just a process. So you need the process so that people understand how the audit works. But like we said, it's basically a variation on the compliance process. You might include in a step we sign an NDA, or you might include a step of this or that. But actually, there's other things that you might want to include, almost as a policy of when we run audits, we're going to include these things. We're going to do these things almost as a matter of policy. So include those sorts of things within a broader document that is almost like a playbook. So, and things that are not just around calculating compliance, but help you manage that audit effectively are things like making good use, what you're going to do during that notice period. You might have a policy set that says that that you don't allow vendors to provide their own tooling, you use your own tool sets. You can agree that you have that as almost as a principle that you apply to all your audits, and then you go away and you negotiate with the vendor during the notice period or after the notice period about those sorts of things and come to an agreement with the vendor. So having all of this stuff laid out up front really puts you in a position of power. It reinforces actually what is already a remarkably strong position that a lot of people don't realise they have when you're actually preparing to do the audit with the vendor and running the audit.
There's one thing I just want to leap in there as well around the audit and getting that vendor playbook established is specifically around standing up and either being that single point of contact for the vendor audit or having one. It's all very well you saying, yes, I'm going to be the gatekeeper here, I'm going to handle this audit, that's great and that's good, but don't forget to let the rest of the IT department know, because there's nothing to stop other representatives of that software vendor then quarterbacking you and saying, oh, I just want that audit data, have you got this or that or the other, that could undermine your efforts and negotiations when it gets towards the the end of the engagement or the audit.
Absolutely. And I think you also need to think about who is responsible and who is accountable for engaging with the vendor and releasing data and that sort of thing. And a lot of IT asset managers say, well, I'm accountable. I'm the person who needs to authorise the release of data. I'm the only person who works with the vendor. And I would say, actually, in many cases, it's wise to split that out so that you're the person who works with the vendor on the day-to-day basis, but you're not the person who authorises the release of data. Because it always gives you that out, that when the vendor is really pushing, you say, I can't authorise the release of data. That's so-and-so's job. And they're senior. They give you what is called air cover. They call it air cover in Britain. You've got that senior management coverage to take a step back, have a bit of a breather, and it takes a lot of the pressure off you to make sure that you've got the right people doing the right things, and that actually you're not in the hot seat in terms of accountability. Mm-hmm. You're running the audit. You're responsible for many aspects of the audit, but ultimately you're not accountable. I think that's a really important thing to play out, and that's the sort of thing that's in your playbook. You can put it in your process that release data, responsible, SAM manager, accountable, finance manager, but actually to have that in the playbook and the reasons why is a really powerful sort of communication tool, but also reinforces the importance of that.
And I think it's while we've got vendor playbook out, is that you might have a generic audit policy or approach, but then it will split out depending on each vendor, and every vendor.
Absolutely. So you can create a generic. So you have your vendor audit procedure, work instructions, for that sort of takes the compliance process and adds that little level of nuance for when you're performing vendor audits. Then you have your vendor audit playbook, which is the general conditions under which you will do the audit and the principles that you apply, sort of a level of detail to make sure that all the points are covered. And then you can take that down again for your high risk vendors. So you could have an Oracle vendor audit playbook, you could have a Microsoft playbook, you could have a SAP playbook, and that's the more detailed instructions about who does what and how it's performed for Oracle, an Oracle audit or an SAP audit or a Microsoft audit. So it's really obviously it's a lot of work. So only do it where you feel it's useful. But these are really powerful techniques to make sure you have your ducks in a row before an audit is even called, rather than trying to scrabble around and agree all of these sorts of things on the fly.
Well, this is knowledge management, because it's all very well writing this stuff down and saying, yes, here it is, this is what we do for IBM or Oracle. But if you then have to, at pace, promulgate that through an organisation, it's so much better to do it if you've got something that is structured and formalised. Absolutely. That can be either hoisted on a website or passed out as a PDF or whatever.
I run software vendor audit training for people, and I have to say people love it. Techies love audit training because you always get into a discussion of, well, what are the triggers for an audit? Why might an audit happen? Ooh. So, actually doing audit training where you explain what the process is, you explain what's in the playbook and how audits will be run, can actually be really quite enjoyable, and it's a nice way to engage different parts of the organisation as well, because everyone loves an audit.
And it's the interesting one there, and sorry, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole with this, is the idea that if, say, for example, you think, right, we're getting rid of a vendor, we're getting that software off the IT estate, we've had enough, we don't want anything more to do with them, either because the technology is not doing it for you anymore, or because they're that sort of obsessive and really hard to do business with. The audit terms and conditions might run beyond the life of the contract. So don't be too surprised if they knock 12 months later, after you believe you've purged all their software of their IT estate, they come back and say, we want to audit you.
Yeah. You want proof.
Point in fact, actually, that's another one of those triggers and alarm bells that you mentioned. So that's what made me think of that.
Yeah.
They've got themselves covered legally to do that.
Yeah.
So typically they have anyway. Just ask them to sort of, and that's another stalling tactic, is to say, can you refer to the terms and conditions under which you're knocking on the door again?
There's all sorts of tips and tricks, and those tips and tricks are out there. They're available. but you do need to think about them in advance, write them down. So, you know, have it as a policy. We will always wait for the vendor audit to quote the audit clause. Except that once they've done that, then it can potentially become much more formal. And if all they wanted to do was push you into negotiating a load of new technology, then, you know, maybe it's a bit of overkill. So it is horses for courses, and how you as an organisation want to run it. Are you very aggressive and defensive, or are you? But these are the things you need to be sorting out in advance.
Yeah, and again, this is where politics and culture and all of this sort of spins in. Is when you do sort of push back. How you push back and the wording that you use in that response to the organisation is pivotal. It is critical. It is.
Yeah.
Don't get sweary Mary with it. Don't get abusive with it. This is just business at the end of the day.
And who does it? This is where the air cover comes in again.
Yeah.
You're saying the words, but you have to have somebody at the back. Where if the audit then pushes back and says, no, that's not acceptable, you have to be able to say, right, well, I can't. This is what I've been told to say. I'm not authorised to make any changes to this wording. I need to go in and consult with this person. So it's these sorts of things that really make a huge difference to the outcome of an audit, and how you feel about it, and how your organisation feels about it. So and actually, the settlement of an audit is another one where, again, this differentiation between responsibility and accountability is really important. Again, you may well be responsible for having conversations. Right, this is where you're non-compliant. This is what you're going to owe us. But actually, again, you have the conversations, but then you take that step back and say, okay, we've agreed these are the facts. I now need that I'm not authorised to actually agree this settlement. We need to take this up to procurement, because they're the people who can negotiate on our behalf, or this needs to go to legal, and legal need to agree the formal wording. I can't do that. So again, you know, it's providing yourself with air cover, and these are the things you need to agree with the legal team in advance that this is what's going to happen. You need to agree with procurement that they're the ones that are going to be negotiating the commercial settlement. So it comes back to really, it's well worth in advance working through what that process looks like for your organisation, and then thinking about how some of the things that need to go in the playbook, the next level of detail below the process, that's sort of principles and policies, and how you actually apply them to audits within your organisation. So and we have a class on this, so we will help you define. We have a template for the process, but equally we can run a workshop which helps build out that playbook, and then we can even run workshops which help with the training and the communication if you want as well. So, you know, pulling all of this together and helping you think this through so that it applies to your organisation, I think it's really powerful if you do it up front. Yeah,
and to that point on the training as well, it's always. The nice thing about it is that you don't have to be a SAM or ITAM nerd as well. So if you feel that there's value in getting procurement involved, legal involved, do it. You know, or contracts department, whatever it may be. If you want somebody senior in the organisation to sit in, it won't be at a level that they'll have to sort of, you know, worry about core factor tables or MIPS or you know, other sort of acronyms that bounce around SAM and ITAM. It's not that sort of a class. So
yeah, very interactive, proactive, can run virtually, and you will get out of it the stuff that we've been talking about today that just makes such a difference when you're running an audit. So I think that's it, really.
I think it is.
Yeah, you know, and please get in touch. There's so much around this topic, and we're always happy to discuss it. Audits are so much fun. It's the war stories that are fun. It's the hindsight that's fun. Anyway, so there we go. That's the audit defence process and playbook.
Cool. We'll see you around.
See you. Bye.